stand in the morning? And who told the ocean you can only come this far? And who showed the moon where to hide till evening? Whose words alone can catch a falling star? Well, I know my Redeemer lives. I know my Redeemer lives. All of creation testifies this life within me cries. I know my Redeemer lives. Yeah, the very same God that spins things in orbit runs to the weary, the worn, and the weak, and the same gentle hands that hold me when I'm broken. They conquer death to bring me victory. Now I know my Redeemer lives.
Wow. The book of Job is kind of dark. Dark subjects. For instance, there's so much death in the book of Job. It begins with 10 of Job's children dying. All of his sheep dying. His many servants, with the exception of a few messengers, dying. He had to have dozens of servants, all these people dying. But then, of course, Job's trial continues, and he is covered over with some kind of terrible sickness that emerges from his skin, and he begins to talk quite a lot about death. He wishes that the day of his birth were wiped off the calendars, that he would somehow be in a sort of time machine and go back so that he was never born, a kind of death. He wishes on another occasion that when he was born, that he would have died at the same time, that he would have been a stillbirth. And so all of this death and this talk about death tonight in Home Fellowship, you're going to examine many of the statements that Job makes about death and try to put together what he understood and what his expectations were. But all this talk about death creates kind of a dark book of the Bible. So I decided to do a little study and see how much Jesus talks about death. See, because I had an idea that he talks about death a lot. So I did a examination of the New Testament, and especially the words of Jesus and how much he talked about death. And I was really surprised, and it's quite amazing, actually. Let me give you my key verse here. I've written a lot of verses down. That's why I have them on paper, so I could go quickly. But I like this one from Luke chapter 15, verse 24. This son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. So they began to celebrate. This is the parable of the loving father and his sinful son returned to him. This son of mine was dead and is alive again. And this actually captures Jesus' way of talking about death. Jesus talks about death in a much more encouraging and hopeful way, really, than we see very much in the book of Job. Here is some of Jesus' talk about people who are dead or death and that subject. The girl is not dead, but asleep. To his disciples, heal the sick, raise the dead. The blind receive sight, the lame walk, those who have leprosy are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the good news is proclaimed to the poor. That's Jesus describing his ministry. Here's another of his statements. Have you not read what God said to you? I'm the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. He's not the God of the dead, but of the living. Messiah will suffer and rise from the dead on the third day, says Jesus. Death could not hold him. The Gospels, I have to say, are a lot brighter, a lot more comforting on the subject of death than some of the book of Job. Here's another thing that Jesus says. The dead will hear the voice of the Son of God, and those who hear will live. He says about Lazarus, take off the grave clothes and let him go. And this statement is not by Jesus, it's by one of the gospel writers, but he puts in perspective the coming of Jesus and the subject of death. The people living in darkness have seen a great light. On those in the land of the shadow of death, a light has been dawned. Well, like I said, tonight in Home Fellowship, you'll be examining the words of Job on the subject of death in order to try to figure out how much he saw, how much he knew about death and what comes after death. But do all of your study tonight realizing that when Jesus comes on the scene, the power, the weight, the darkness, the depression, the sadness around death are lifted by the ministry of the Son of God. Amen. Have a good home fellowship tonight.